Hello, everyone. I would like to keep this short, at least as short as I can. This will be take two. So I'm here to discuss something related to the recent events in New Zealand. I know that it's been covered and might be somewhat beating an old horse at this point, beating a dead horse at this point. But I think there's a better way to describe how, from a strategic standpoint, individuals and almost every single major media outlet is approaching the perpetrator of this crime and his statements. So I'm going to give it a shot. I'm going to try to see if I can put this together. And I'm going to be reading this from Robert Greene's 33 Strategies of War. If you're not familiar with Robert Greene, he's written a couple of different books that I think most folks should read. The primary two being the 33 Strategies of War and the 48 Laws of Power. But as the excerpt from the Strategies of War, this is in regards to what's known as not fighting the last war. What limits individuals, as well as nations, is the inability to confront reality, to see things for what they are. As we grow older, we become more rooted in the past. Habit takes over. Something that has worked for us before becomes a doctrine, a shell to protect us from reality. Repetition replaces creativity. We rarely realize we're doing this because it is almost impossible for us to see it happening in our own minds. Then suddenly, a young Napoleon crosses our path, a person who does not respect tradition, who fights in a new way. Only then do we see that our ways of thinking and responding have fallen behind the times. Never take it for granted that your past successes will continue into the future. Actually, your past successes are your biggest obstacle. Every battle, every war is different, and you cannot assume that what worked before will work today. You must cut yourself loose from the past and open your eyes to the present. Your tendency to fight the last war may lead to your final war. Now, I am by no means likening this shooter to Napoleon. Suppose he has a particularly violent inclination. Not the brightest bulb on the Christmas tree overall, but we'll say the similarities end there. When it comes to fighting the last war, this is what we're seeing with how the media and many individuals are approaching how we respond to the shooter. If you look at shooters from the last 10 or 15 years, 15 would take us back to 2004. So at the very least, the last 10 years. We're dealing with people who, not entirely, but in large part, the ones the media is used to confronting, fall into one of two camps. You have attacks like Charlie Hebdo and other European assaults where it is a radicalized individual doing this for a specific, typically religious, not exclusively religious, but primarily religious aim. Then you have the fame shooters, people who are looking for infamy or for some sort of notoriety from these acts. They publish their videos to social media. They send their materials directly to news agencies. They do this because they want to be known. They want to be remembered. And their motivations don't tend to go much further than that. They, as an individual, want to be remembered. that doesn't seem to be what we're dealing with in terms of the New Zealand shooter. What we have with the Christchurch shootings is someone who is looking to accelerate a global conflict. If it helps to put it into a more familiar frame, think of Charles Manson. Manson felt that through his family's actions, he could bring about a race war in the United States that would ultimately lead to the proverbial end of days. That this war would get so out of hand that the US would be nearly destroyed wholesale, and that him and his cult would basically ride out this destruction in the desert, emerging after it was all over to rule the new world. In this case, with the recent events, the shooter's motivations, as far as they can be honestly assessed, appear to be accelerating a war of culture rather than a war of race between people who lean to the progressive and conservative sides of the spectrum. The weapons he chose to use, the targets he selected, the things he decided to say in his manifesto and in the video, all of these things were designed to elicit a very specific reaction from very specific factions within the current cultural climate. He brings up PewDiePie. He brings up Candace Owens. He scrawls a bunch of different names and dates and phrases on his weapons. Everything that he's done has had a specific target in mind. And so I think it's important that we recognize that a lot of what he's done should be called chaff. It's a distraction tactic. It is a way for him to cloud the discussion around what his actual aims were. If he can get people talking about how terrible PewDiePie is, or how Candace Owens is somehow responsible for a white nationalist who hates American conservatives, is responsible for what he's done, then the ridiculousness of his actual beliefs can go unchallenged. By all accounts, it seems that he was radicalized in France. He saw the defeat of Marine Le Pen as some great travesty, in much the same way as the Quebec mosque shooter here in Canada was much along the same lines. You're dealing with an accelerationist white supremacist. And I don't say that lightly. This is somebody who... He didn't do this for video games. He didn't do this for meme culture. He didn't do this because, well, he spent some time on Chan boards, and that's where we got this from. He wants everybody fighting amongst themselves. He has an extra personal motivation. This goes beyond him as an individual. Your fame shooters, your revenge shooters at schools, your Eric Harris's, Columbine shooters and the rest. Very small scale. Their scope was very, very narrow in who it was they were trying to impact. This New Zealand shooter is looking to impact everyone. The way that he's trying to do this is to make specific cultural references, to pit the left against the right and the right against the left, and to get everybody who's in the relative middle pushed further and further out to the extremes, or pulled further out to the extremes by the people already there. And if we keep treating him like a fame shooter, it's going to work. The doctrine with a fame shooter is you don't give them the notoriety they want. You don't publish their materials. You don't show their face. You completely blot out everything you can. The best thing we can do in regards to this shooter is to honestly examine what it is he believes. His ideology does not hold merit. It may be internally consistent, but then again, so are other worlds of absolute fiction. Just because he may have a message that is, oh, it follows in its own logic, it doesn't mean it applies to the real world. And the more you can bring that out, the more you will see that people look at it, dismiss it as being ridiculous, and instead of dividing people, you can effectively use him to counteract what he's trying to do. You can use him as the best weapon against his goal. But you cannot do this by trying to just sanitize the world of his existence. The internet never forgets is an adage that everyone should be familiar with by now. The video is out there. His manifesto is out there. It's not going away. If you try and suppress it, you only drive it further underground, and you don't get it examined. You don't have it brought to light. You don't get to poke the easy to poke holes in his arguments. It just radicalizes more people. I really hope that we can get people to start looking at this in a way that doesn't conform to the doctrines we've used to address previous shooters. Because not all shooters do what they do for the same reasons. They don't have the same end goal in mind. So you need to address each new shooter or each new radical or bomber or whatever. You need to address them as they appear. As they come up, as they begin to exert themselves, enforce their ideas in the world, or impose their ideas in the world, that is when you address them. You go, okay, this is what this person legitimately represents. Not, well, this is what we've seen before, so this is just probably what we should do now. Stop fighting the last war. Start fighting this one, or you stand to lose it. And I don't believe it's a war we can afford to lose.